Should you rent or should you buy? I think we all encounter this question at least once in our adult life. For us, it's been multiple times because we've lived in many different cities. So in this video, we are walking you through some of the things to consider as you're making that decision for yourself.
Hey guys, it's Joseph.
And Tasha from One Big Happy Life.
Today we are talking about renting versus buying. As most of you know, we have owned several houses, many houses between the both of us, and so we have made this decision lots of times.
We've also rented.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it comes down to not only financial choices, but also lifestyle decisions, because it's both of those things whenever you decide where you're going to live.
Yeah, and it's not a permanent decision. I mean, like Joseph just said, we have rented and we've owned a house. I've gone from owning a house in an area to selling it and renting in the same area because it made the most financial sense. So don't think of it as this permanent, like once in your life decision, because you actually may end up making it multiple times. I think the average American owns like 2.5 homes over the course of their lifetime.
And we're doing our best to up that average.
Yeah, I think we're on home number 5. This is home number 5 for us. Okay, so let's talk about the financial side first.
Okay, let's start with pros for renting. Okay, so number one, and I think everybody relates to this, you don't have to pay for maintenance costs. It's just, you don't worry about it. You call somebody and they come and they deal with that for you. So that part's nice.
Another pro is it's easier, well, there's some amount of mobility, right? Because you can always, once your lease is up, you can just pick up and leave and you don't have to worry about having to sell your apartment or rent it out to someone else. That's the landlord's responsibility.
Also, usually it is cheaper, like you can find a cheaper rent than you could find the cheapest house. So like the payment for the cheapest house is going to be a little bit more than the cheapest rent that you could possibly find most of the time.
Now, be cautious about this when you're comparing or when you hear people saying that renting is cheaper than owning. I find that they often compare renting a 1 or a 2-bedroom apartment to owning a 3-bedroom house. Well, those aren't the same properties. So of course, the smaller space is going to cost less to rent. And so the better comparison is what is the rent on a 2-bedroom condo versus a 2-bedroom apartment, or the rent on a 3-bedroom house versus owning that same 3-bedroom house.
An added bonus to paying that cheaper rent is that you could take that savings and invest it. And so then you're going to get money that way. Over time, you're going to get a higher rate of return on those investments. Now let's talk about some potential renting cons on the financial side. Let's say that you probably want to own a home eventually. Well, if you bought a home today, you're going to pay one price. But if you rent for a few years, you're going to pay more when you ultimately purchase that house, because home values tend to go up over time, and they're going to go up whether you own that home or not. Now, if you did own that home, you would get those gains and you would have that wealth building. But if you don't, you have to pay that extra higher price.
So another con is that rental payments don't stop. They go on for the rest of your life as long as you're in that rental. Whereas at some point, you won't have a mortgage anymore on your house, and so then you're just paying taxes and insurance. So some people might say that money spent on a rental is just wasted. Now, of course, you have to look at how much is being spent on the rental, like the difference between renting and buying, to see how much is waste. Because when you own a house, you do still have to pay taxes, and you also have to pay interest on your mortgage. Now, a quick note on the taxes. For anyone that says that you don't have to pay interest and you don't have to pay taxes when you're renting, that's just not true. Your rental payment goes towards paying the mortgage on the property, all of the maintenance costs, and some profit for the property owner. You just call it rent, but they call it their mortgage payment and their profit and their maintenance fees. So you're still paying it.
Yeah, really, you have no idea how much you're paying for all of those things and how much they're just pocketing.
Yep.
Let's talk about the benefits of homeownership. If you're looking at renting one house or buying that same house, it is almost always going to be cheaper to buy the house, because if you're renting the house, the landlord needs to roll in all that extra insurance, those taxes, and his profit, because it's risky business being a landlord. Now, the one exception is if the landlord has held that property for a very long time, he might be undercutting the market. So he could get higher rents, but he's intentionally charging less to attract tenants faster or whatever the case may be. So purely because he's had it so long, they might be able to give it to you for a lower price.
Yeah, and so to use a personal example, we weren't able to find a rental in our neighborhood cheaper than the cost of buying the house. All of the rentals were several $100s more, or they were much, much smaller places, not even apartments, but very, very small houses. And so it just made, and even they were still pretty darn expensive, even though they were like half the size. It's insane. So anyway, just that point totally stands. It totally stands for us here. And also, I have bought houses in areas where apartments went for more than the houses were going for. So that was pretty insane. So another pro of owning a house is that it is an asset. Now, like any asset, it can depreciate. It may not necessarily increase in value. So that's kind of the risk, but it is an asset. And in theory, historically, real estate has appreciated over time, although there have been market fluctuations where the price will drop, but eventually it recovers and then continues to appreciate.
Another pro is that you can do long-term financial planning. If you're renting, you know that you're only going to be there a year or 2 years maybe. You don't know what your rent is going to do at the end of that. And there are reasons that your landlord could cut your lease short and you'd just be gone anyway. So owning a home is the only way that you can really start to plan very long-term, because you know your mortgage payment isn't going to change over the 30 years. Or if you go and buy a house for cash, well then you know that you're not going to have any payment. And so you can really model and project out a much, much farther when you own a home.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's talk about the financial cons of owning a home. Number one, you are responsible for all of the upkeep and maintenance. It can get expensive, we know.
Yeah, including the major repair costs. So not just, there's a clogged sewer line or drain line somewhere that you can't do yourself, but replacing the AC, replacing the roof. Those are all things that are going to cost a lot of money, and they are on you.
Also, the transaction costs of buying and selling a house. So you have your hefty down payment, which could be as much as 20%, depending on the type of mortgage you decide to get. You have the realtor commissions, and we have tips to save you tens of thousands of dollars on that. So stay tuned for our next video on how to buy a house. And then, of course, there's transfer taxes, fees, document prep fees. I mean, that's tens of thousands of dollars to buy and sell a house. So that's pretty pricey.
And also, there are going to be different risks involved with owning a home. I would say you're going to have more assets at risk because, I mean, think about all the people that just had all their homes flooded in Houston. A lot of them didn't have flood insurance, even though they lived right on the coast. So, and so homeowners insurance policies don't always cover floods.
Yeah.
And so then that's something that you have to then cover yourself. And so you got to prepare for those kinds of things.
Okay, so that's the financial side. Let's talk about the lifestyle side, because most financial decisions aren't just based on doing the absolute financially optimal thing to do. They all kind of also depend on what kind of lifestyle we want to live and what we want our lives to look like, right? So the pros of renting, so mobility, right? So if you like moving from city to city year after year, well, you may not want to go ahead and buy a house because there's a lot of transaction costs involved. Now, it can be with renting somewhat of a false sense of mobility because you are stuck in a lease. I have not had I've only had 1 month-to-month lease, and it ended up costing a lot more than a 12-month lease, which makes sense. So you may not be able to get out of that 12-month lease, whereas it's never taken me 12 months to sell a house and move. So, I don't know.
That's right. Also, renting, you frequently can get into a more desirable area for a lower cost. So let's say there's some certain amenities, better transit, some different stores. You want to be more urban. Well, there might not even be homes in the area that you're looking to move to. And so renting is a perfect option for that kind of lifestyle.
Or the homes in that area might be way out of your price range. And so if you want to live in that area, maybe for the schools, an apartment may be your only option. Another pro is chances are you're going to be living in a smaller space, which means it's cheaper to decorate because you don't have as much space to decorate. And because you don't have as much space, you're less likely to try to fill it with a whole bunch of stuff you don't need.
That's true. Now let's talk about the cons. Everybody knows this one that has rented: noisy neighbors. Somebody's going to be above you, a party next door that you're not invited to because you were loud the day before and they're mad at you. And so that kind of stuff happens constantly. We always hear our neighbors.
Next con, you can't change anything without permission. And I love home decor. I like painting. I like doing stuff. And so I feel so restricted when I live in an apartment.
Now, there are also going to be times when you can't find a place to rent. So, like our area here, there are no apartments in the school district. Literally no apartments. They don't exist. And so if you don't feel like owning a home, you have no option here. You could not live here.
And lastly, there's the lack of privacy. So your landlord can come into your apartment, usually with some amount of notice. But if there's an emergency, like what happened to Joseph one time where the neighbors above him, the sprinkler system went off. And so the landlord just had to come in his apartment unannounced. Well, that sucks.
The landlord, the fire department, because there was water pouring into my apartment from above.
Yeah, so lack of privacy is a big thing. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of owning. So pros, you had a lot more space, right? Chances are, for the same amount of money.
You're also going to be able to do a lot more with that space. Certainly on the inside, you're going to be able to make some changes, renovate, make it your own place. Now, if you live in a place with a strict homeowners association or you're in a condo, there might be some different rules, especially on the outside, but you still have more freedom than you would if you were renting.
Yeah, and speaking of making the place your own, you can build memories there. I mean, I have fond memories of my childhood home. I go back to my tiny little room, still painted purple with the stenciling that I made along the top when I was 16. And it's nice going back there. And so, it just creates this sort of family memory repository. And it's like, how can you put a price tag on that?
I'll mention long-term planning here as well, because you can start planning things like, if you want the kids to come home every holiday, well, you can do that. You can know that they're going to come home and you're going to be in that same spot. They know where you are.
Mm-hmm. Now, the only real con that we could see that wasn't also a pro for apartments that we've already mentioned is that the maintenance involved. So you're going to spend a lot of time loving your home. And by that, I mean mowing the lawn, spraying insecticide, cleaning the gutters. Homes take a lot of time to maintain, or money. You can pay someone else to do it. So if you are not the kind of person that likes to spend a lot of time caring for their space, then you're not going to enjoy owning a home because there's a lot of upkeep involved.
That's true. So I hope we've given you many ideas and things to think about when you're making that decision. And it's going to be different depending on where you are and your personal preferences. It's going to be hard to have a definitive right or wrong.
Yeah, and we're going to be doing more on homeownership and making the decision, and more on the financial side, like how much house you can afford, that kind of thing. So if you have questions, be sure to drop us a comment down below so we can try to include that in a future video.
All right. Until next time.
Bye, guys.